Hello, welcome to the final night. It happens to be the fifth night in my Synergy N7 build video. Tonight we're going to put the boom together. Last night we finished up the main body. I left it with the boom, tail control rod and front tail linkage, the control rod ends curing. Those cured fine. I went ahead and put the link on this end. This end you got to leave link off. You have to put it through the boom supports on the actual boom before you put the other link on. And I like to build the boom and everything first, so that's set that aside. Real quick, run you through the different tail parts you're going to have. Obviously you have the 700 class boom, torque tube. These are the CNC aluminum torque tube chucks. You got a 2mm bolt that goes through there, that goes through the hole in the boom in the torque tube. There is a nylock nut provided, but I'm still going to put a little bit of red Loctite on that. The nylock nut is insurance, but I still like red Loctite. The Synergy N7 uses a standard torque tube bearing with plastic housing and rubber O-rings. We will have to lubricate those O-rings to get them down the boom. You've got plastic boom. These are tail control rod supports that go around the boom. And then over here are the four control ends for the boom support rods. This guy right here is a CNC aluminum boom clamp. Put that on. Boom assembly is pretty straightforward. Most people know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. When you're putting the torque tube bearings on the torque tube, I like to use my CA again. I know a lot of people like to use red Loctite. Red Loctite's great. It just takes a long time to cure well enough to put the boom on. CA works well if you're careful. You have to be very careful not to use too much so you don't get CA in the bearing when you're putting it together. When you're putting the torque tube bearings on, you want to make sure that you put them unequal distance from each other. And what I mean is, to avoid harmonic resonance, the distance from the end of the torque tube to the first bearing, the distance from the first bearing to the second bearing, and the distance from the second bearing to the other end need to all three be different distances. If you make them all even, you're going to encourage harmonic vibrations. So I tend to put one about a third of the way to the end and one half the distance. I'll CA those guys on, let that cure. I'm going to use a trick I picked up from a guy on the forum. I'm going to use a little Windex, spray down inside the boom, lubricate the boom, slide the torque tube down in there, and when the Windex dries, it'll dry clean. There won't be any residues in there, and the boom shouldn't, the torque tube shouldn't move around too much. I'm going to go ahead and cut the camera and CA the boom, the torque tube bearings, and install the torque tube chucks, and then I'll come back. Alright, torque tube is CA'd together, down inside the boom. Torque tube is spinning nice and free. CA set up well, bearings are very smooth. Now what I'm going to do is, trial and error and experience has taught me, you want to put the tail control rod and the boom clamps on before you put the tail box. That way you can have both ends of the boom free to manipulate the tail control rod, getting the other link on, getting the link sized. So I'm going to go ahead and put the boom support clamps, the tail control rod clamps on, and the boom support clamps. And when I come back, I'm going to have the torque tube, the boom rather, pretty much ready to put on the helicopter. Alright, welcome back. Alright, so I've got the torque tube in the boom. I've got the tail control rod guides, kind of sort of where they're going to end up. Obviously you can't do final placement until the boom's on the helicopter. I did get the other tail link on. Of course, Bodo sizer, sized both links at both ends, make sure I've got no drag there. Again, the simplest thing you can do to help prevent tail problems is make sure your tail control system is as smooth as possible. No resistance, no drag, goes a long way. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you how I go about pinning the boom. The E7, just like the E5 and the E7 SE and the N7, all have a screw right in the side of the tail case. You zoom in there for you. It's right here. That screw serves one purpose and one purpose only: pinning the tail box. There's a couple of ways of doing it. Some are easier than others. I'm going to show you how I do it. First and foremost, you want to go ahead and put the tail box on. Get it seated all the way up in there. I push the tail box, the boom, all the way up into the tail box. Now I can adjust these so I'm not super worried about getting the boom perfectly square right now, but I like to get it in the ballpark so I don't have to move them too much. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab my 2.5. The bottom bolt on the fin is actually a pinch joint. We're going to tighten that up so that the tail box doesn't move on the shaft. What I have here is a drill bit. Now I like to use standard drill bits for this one. For example, the drill bit I'm using is a 3/32. It's just a hair smaller than the threads inside that tail box. So I can get the drill bit down inside the tail box without damaging the threads of the tail box. So it shouldn't take much. This thing's drilled pretty good. I'm just going to tap, score the mark. I'm not going to try to go all the way through right now. Turn the tail box back over. Loosen that up. Go ahead and pull the tail box off. And now you can see there's a mark on my boom where that drill bit was. I'm going to go ahead and pull my torque tube back out of the way. You could probably do this before putting the torque tube in if you want, but at the very least pull it back out of the way so you don't risk damaging it. And then I'm just going to put my drill bit in that hole and go ahead and push it on through. Clean it up, check the inside, make sure there's no burrs on the inside. Ready to go. Put the tail box back in, rotate it till that hole lines up. Definitely want to put Loctite on this screw. This pin does you no good if it backs out. Might be about out of blue Loctite. I really had to shake that bottle. Alright, his eyeball down in there. Now because that screw hole is actually a slightly smaller than the screw we used, it's going to go in a little snug, but that's on purpose. You want the screw to cut the last little bit so that it actually bites. You're actually, not only are you screwing into the tail box, but you've got some threads holding the boom too. Now if that's good, I can flip this back over and tighten up my tail box for the last time. Snug. This top screw that holds the tail fin on, I put that on off camera. You want to make sure you put Loctite in that one. It is just a standard, it's not a clamp bolt. All it does is hold the fin on. This bottom piece, like all the other pinch screws on the helicopter, do not require Loctite. Little Loctite isn't going to hurt anything, but it certainly don't require it. The clamping force is enough to help retain the screw. Now I can go ahead and get my torque tube back in. I'm going to hold the tail. I like to push the torque tube all the way in and seat it, and then just pull it back just a little bit. There we go. As you can see, my tail moves nice and smooth. Bearings are free. Next step, I'm going to go ahead and pop these links on, reposition some things, put the boom on the helicopter, and when we come back, I'll be talking about how I set up the boom supports. Alright guys, bear with me for 1 second. I might have started the camera, I touched early. I've got the boom on, boom clamps tight. There is a spot in the front of the boom here to pin the front of the boom. Never a bad idea to pin the front. Me personally, the boom clamps on this helicopter are so beefy, I've never felt the need to pin the front. But pinning the front's done the same way. Now that you have the boom square, tail box is square to the frame, the tail output shaft is perpendicular to the main shaft. You could use the same step, mark it, pull the boom out, drill it, put it back. I just personally don't think it's necessary. I'm not going to do it. Two things about the tail boom. One, and this is going to be extremely hard to see on the camera. You're just going to have to take my word for it. If you look up through this crack between the main frame and the main gear, you can see the front of the front boom clamp. When you're putting the boom into the clamps, you want to look through there and push the boom in until you can see the tip of the boom sticking out past the clamp, and then back it out until it's flush. If you let the boom push all the way up in there and impact the torque tube transmission, you're going to apply undue pressure to the bearings, possibly mess with the geometry and alignment of the torque tube transmission, and certainly going to cause a lot of extra drag. So look through that little easeway, line the boom up so it's flush with the front of the front boom clamp, and snug it down. Again, check to make sure your tail box and output shaft are square to the perpendicular to the main shaft, and then tighten it all up. Once you do that, You can connect your tail control rod. As you can see, I got the tail control rod connected down there. You want to make sure that when you're hooking up the tail with the rudder servo centered, the linkage in the middle here centered, you want to adjust your tail rod so the tail bell crank is perpendicular to the frame, or as darn close as possible. Given that these are not turnbuckles, you only have half turns to work with, it is a little more difficult to get it exactly. I got this one pretty close. I'm quite happy with that. So when the servo is centered, the horn is centered, the linkage is centered, the turnbuckle is centered in its travel, everything is good there. One thing you are going to notice, when the turnbuckle is centered, the tail actually has a couple of degrees of pitch built into it. That's to naturally counter the torque of the rotor. That is normal. You want to center the bell crank. Don't set 0 on the pitch. Center the bell crank on the tail box. All that's really left to do now, and I'm going to try to set the helicopter up there so you can see it. All it's really do now is put the pipe on, run the plumbing for the motor, and then I need to put the boom supports on. This last heavier 4mm frame spacer we have goes right here, and those long bolts hold the boom supports on. Boom support ends are epoxied onto the carbon fiber boom supports. I do those last, so I can actually put the epoxy on, put the boom support ends on, and then mount the boom support to the helicopter, so that while I'm setting my tail throws, my boom support ends can be curing on the helicopter. It's just a real simple trick to make sure the boom supports, the support ends are cure square and they don't push off like the carbon fiber tail control rod ends tried to do. I'm going to stop the camera there. I'm going to put the pipe on, run the plumbing, put the boom supports on. Alright guys, there's only one more thing for us to talk about, and that is the canopy itself. I got the tail control rod, tail travels adjusted, double checked all my comps. I even set some preliminary values for roll rate and whatnot, and get to use some values I'm familiar with in the N7 in the flybarless. So helicopter's basically ready to go. Now it's time to deal with the canopy. In the box you had a couple of baggies. These are the plastic pieces that match up to the rest of the front canopy mount, and these are the grommets for the canopy for the rear mounts. These guys right here are actually the tail blade spacers and the axle bolts for the actual tail pieces on. All of this is needed for the canopy. Basically what you do here is these grommets here are going to go in the back. Now Matt did a really good job with the shop on these canopies. I have not had to trim or get my canopy reamer out, body reamer, to get these grommets in on the other one. And it certainly looks like, yep, this production kit's going to do the same thing. The grommets go right in. Get grommets on both sides here. Let's back that out so you can actually see what I'm doing. I find it easier just to start an edge and to kind of fold it up on itself, working it around. It's not real rocket science, but you want to be ginger. These are silicone rubber, rubber grommets. They will tear if you're not careful. Those grommets are in. The front mounts are actually pretty easy. Now these are going to be a little hard to do on camera because you've got to do from the inside. But basically you've got this U-shaped piece of plastic, and it has a shelf on the back that is milled in a oval. The front canopy mount has that same oval shape in it. Now when you put this up in there, you want the open side of that bracket facing the back. It goes up in there like that, and it fits right in there. This washer and this screw, cap screw, go through the front and screw into the dowel ring mount. Like so. Just want to make sure that it is actually pulled up into, don't over tighten that, you don't want to strip that out. That's not really a pressure joint. The dowel rings you're cutting threads in the Delrin as you tighten the screw. I know some guys that like to put CA on bolts like that. I don't think it's necessary, but be careful not to strip it out. We're going to flip it over and do the same thing back here. Get my screw ready. Get the canopy. Again, open side of the channel facing the back of the canopy. Get it lined up, matching the oval in the canopy. Snug that guy on up. And voila! Canopy's ready to go on. Alright guys, I'm going to make a point of showing this in better detail when I do the maiden flight. I'll have the camera off the pedestal out the field so you'll be able to see a little easier, but I'm going to try to show you. These front mounts on the for the canopy, you're going to put the canopy on. Oops, the new canopy. You're going to make sure you hook those front mounts with those Delrin sleeves. Push. And that canopy's on. It's that simple. New canopy, I think, got to settle a little bit. When I'm not trying to keep it on canopy and actually stand on film and actually stand directly in front of the helicopter, that's a lot easier to do. But there she is, guys. Synergy N7. Put the blades on it. She's ready for a maiden.